The moment she left, it felt like the entire world had stopped moving, as if time itself had frozen to witness the cruel twist of fate. One minute, she was there, standing by my side, her laughter filling the empty spaces of my life, and the next, she was gone, vanished without a single word, leaving only the echoes of what used to be. There was no note, no explanation, no message, nothing to indicate why she had decided to walk away. The silence she left behind was deafening, a void that seemed impossible to fill. I kept replaying the moments we had shared, trying to understand if there had been a warning I had missed, a subtle signal that I had overlooked. I thought about the last conversation we had, analyzing every word, every tone, every pause, hoping that some hidden meaning would reveal itself, some clue that would make sense of the chaos she had left behind. The house felt emptier than ever, each corner reminding me of her presence, her smile, her voice, and the warmth of her touch. I could still smell her perfume lingering faintly in the air, and it haunted me, a bittersweet reminder of the life that had been ripped away so abruptly. I walked from room to room, hoping to find some trace of her decision, a reason that would make sense, but all I found were memories, frozen like photographs in the corners of my mind, each one sharper and more painful than the last. I remembered the mornings we had shared, the small rituals that had become a part of our lives, the coffee cups we had left for each other, the soft laughter that had accompanied the quiet moments, the gentle conversations that had made ordinary days feel extraordinary. Now, every familiar object seemed like a ghost, a reminder that she had left, that she had chosen to disappear without confronting the truth, without facing the consequences, without even saying goodbye. I questioned myself endlessly, wondering if there had been something I could have done differently, some action or word that might have made her stay, something that might have prevented the heartbreak that now consumed me. I thought about our plans, the dreams we had built together, the promises that had been spoken in sincerity, and they all seemed to crumble in the emptiness she left behind. I could feel the weight of her absence pressing down on me, a heaviness that made every breath feel laborious, every step a reminder of what had been lost. Friends and family tried to console me, offering words that were meant to comfort, but they could not reach the depth of the emptiness inside me. They could not understand the suddenness of it all, the way someone so essential to my world could disappear like a shadow at dusk. The nights were the hardest, when the silence became unbearable, when every creak of the house reminded me that she was no longer there. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining her face, replaying her gestures, her laughter, her expressions, trying to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, she would return, that this was not the final chapter of our story. But each morning brought the same cruel reality, and the hope I clung to seemed to wither slowly with every passing day. The emptiness was not just physical. It invaded my thoughts, my memories, my dreams. I felt as though I were walking through a world where colors had been drained, where sounds had lost their meaning, where life continued around me, but I remained trapped in the moment she had left. I questioned why people leave without explanation, why some stories end abruptly, why love and connection can be so fragile and fleeting. I thought about the last time I had seen her, the look in her eyes, the tension I had ignored, the subtle signs that something was wrong, and I wondered if she had felt trapped, suffocated, or lost in ways I could never understand. The uncertainty was torturous, a mental torment that made simple tasks feel monumental, that turned ordinary conversations into reminders of absence, that transformed familiar spaces into empty shells. I wandered through the city, through streets we had walked together, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, to find some trace that she was still there somewhere, but every corner, every cafe, every park only reminded me that she had left for good. The questions piled up endlessly, each one heavier than the last. I asked myself if she had been unhappy, if she had loved me less than I had loved her, if there was someone else, or if it was all something I could never have foreseen. I tried to reach out, calling her number, sending messages, desperate for any response, but each attempt was met with silence, each plea unanswered, and the feeling of rejection cut deeper than I could have imagined. The absence of closure was suffocating, the not knowing more painful than any confrontation could have been. I found myself lost in memories, clinging to moments that now seemed like illusions, fragments of a life that had existed only in my mind, and I realized that the hardest part was not just her leaving, but the way she left. As if erasing herself from my world entirely, leaving me to make sense of a pain I could not articulate, a void I could not fill, and a loss I could not comprehend after she left. The emotional aftermath hit like a storm I was completely unprepared for, a wave of feelings that swept over me and refused to let go. At first, there was disbelief, an almost numb shock that someone who had been such an integral part of my life could disappear without warning. I kept thinking it was a mistake, that she would come back, that this silence was temporary, a pause before our lives returned to normal. But as the hours turned into days, and the days into weeks, the reality became unavoidable, and the shock transformed into a deep, aching loneliness that settled into my chest and refused to move. Every small task, every mundane action, seemed harder than before because there was a hollow space in my life where she used to be, a space filled with memories that now only caused pain. I found myself constantly replaying the past, searching for moments where I might have failed her, where I might have said or done something that drove her away, even though I could not identify anything concrete. The emotional weight was heavy, pressing down on me, making me question not just my relationship with her, but my own worth and place in the world. I felt lost in the labyrinth of my own mind, where every thought spiraled into self-doubt and despair, where every memory became both a treasure and a torment. Sleep became restless and fleeting, interrupted by dreams in which she appeared, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying, always leaving before I could reach her. The nights were endless, stretching out into hours of staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of a home that had once been filled with laughter and conversation, now echoing with emptiness. I tried to distract myself, to occupy my mind with work, friends, and daily routines, but nothing seemed to fill the void. Even the things I had loved before, books, music, walks in the park, felt hollow because she was not there to share them with me, not there to laugh, to comment, to experience the small joys of life together. Anger started creeping in next, subtle at first, a flicker in the corners of my thoughts, questioning why she had left, why she had not cared enough to say goodbye, why she had chosen silence over honesty. That anger grew, mingling with sadness, creating a bitter cocktail of emotions that made it hard to breathe, hard to think clearly, hard to move forward. I felt betrayed, even though no betrayal had been explicitly committed, because trust is built on presence and communication, and she had abandoned both without warning. I began questioning everything about our relationship, every gesture, every word, every shared secret, trying to find some hidden meaning, some flaw that had gone unnoticed, some reason that would make sense of her departure. Isolation became both a choice and a consequence, as I withdrew from friends and family, not wanting to share my pain but also unable to distract myself from it. Every attempt at conversation seemed to fall flat because my mind was consumed with her absence, with the echo of her leaving, with the gnawing question of why someone who mattered so much could vanish from my life so completely. I started noticing things I had never paid attention to before, the places we had visited together, the food we had shared, the songs we had listened to, all now tainted with a sense of loss and longing. Memories that once brought joy now brought tears, and I struggled to reconcile the love I had felt with the emptiness that now surrounded me. People tried to console me, offering clichés about moving on, about time healing all wounds, but their words felt hollow, unable to touch the rawness of my emotions, unable to acknowledge the profound sense of abandonment I was experiencing. I found myself oscillating between despair and anger, between hope and hopelessness, sometimes holding on to the tiniest shred of optimism that she would return, other times convinced that the connection we shared had been nothing more than an illusion, a fleeting moment in time that had left me scarred. Daily routines became exercises in endurance, each day a challenge to exist without her, each moment a reminder of the space she had left behind. I cried in private, I laughed in public, I pretended to be okay while inside I was unraveling, trying to piece together a life that suddenly felt meaningless. The emotional aftermath was not a simple sadness, it was a complex web of feelings: grief, anger, confusion, longing, betrayal, and emptiness, all intertwined and impossible to separate, each feeding into the other, creating a constant state of inner turmoil that refused to relent. Even the simplest acts, like hearing her favorite song or passing by a place she had loved, would trigger waves of emotion so intense that they left me shaken, as though the world itself had turned against me, highlighting her absence at every turn. In those moments, I realized that emotional pain is not linear. It comes in waves, unpredictable and uncontrollable, hitting you when you least expect it, leaving scars that are invisible but deeply felt, shaping your thoughts, your actions, and your very perception of the world. After her sudden departure, I found myself desperately searching for answers, grasping at fragments of memory and fleeting moments, trying to make sense of what had happened. Every detail replayed in my mind countless times, as if repeating them could reveal some hidden clue or unlock the reason behind her leaving. I thought back to the way she spoke, the subtle changes in her tone, the pauses that now seemed like warnings I had ignored. I questioned every smile, every gentle touch, every whispered word of affection, wondering if there had been a hidden meaning I was too naive to notice. The uncertainty gnawed at me relentlessly, creating a storm inside that I could neither calm nor control. I reached out, calling her number again and again, sending messages filled with hope and desperation, but the silence that greeted me each time was deafening. It was not just the absence of her voice, but the absence of explanation that tormented me the most. I wanted to confront her, to understand why she had walked away without a word, but there was no way to do so, and every attempt to seek closure was met with emptiness. Friends and family offered sympathy and advice, but they could not truly understand the weight of unanswered questions, the unbearable tension of wondering what had gone wrong. I found myself obsessing over moments I had once considered ordinary, trying to decode them, replaying them as if analyzing them from every angle would uncover some hidden truth. I remembered the day she had seemed distracted, the fleeting look of sadness in her eyes that I had dismissed as a passing mood, the hesitation in her voice that now felt like a silent warning. I questioned whether there had been signs I had missed, opportunities to prevent this heartbreak, and the thought that I had been blind to them filled me with guilt and regret. I scoured social media, looking for any hint, any clue, anything that could give me insight into her thoughts, her feelings, her reasons, but all I found were fragments of her life continuing without me. Seeing her existence move forward without acknowledgement of our shared past only deepened the confusion and the ache inside me. The human mind is cruel in these moments, forcing you to create scenarios, imagining conversations that never took place, rehearsing confrontations that will never happen, constructing reasons and explanations that may not even exist. I found myself trapped in a cycle of overthinking, unable to escape the relentless tide of questions that consumed every waking moment. Even mundane tasks became colored by her absence, as if every step I took, every place I went, every sound I heard reminded me that she had left without a reason. The city we once shared now felt alien, familiar streets becoming paths of reflection and doubt, every cafe and park sparking memories that I could neither shake nor understand fully. I questioned myself endlessly. Had I loved her enough? Had I given her what she needed? Had I noticed the signs that she was struggling? And then I wondered about her perspective. What had she felt in those final days? What turmoil or conflict had driven her to vanish without explanation? The not knowing was a weight on my chest, a silent suffocation that made it hard to breathe, to sleep, to exist normally. I imagined confronting her, demanding answers, and yet part of me feared the truth, fearing that whatever she might say would shatter my perception of her and our relationship completely. The search for answers became an obsession, a relentless pursuit to fill the void of ambiguity she had left behind, but the harder I tried, the more elusive the truth became. Every memory I revisited, every text I reread, Every conversation I analyzed seemed to give more questions than answers, deepening the confusion and intensifying the emotional pain. I realized that some questions might never have answers, that closure is not always granted, and that the human heart is often left to grapple with mysteries that have no resolution. The absence of explanation forced me to confront not just her leaving, but the uncertainty inherent in relationships, the fragility of trust, and the reality that people sometimes make choices that defy logic, compassion, or reason. The search for answers consumed my thoughts, invading my work, my sleep, my moments of solitude, turning every quiet moment into a battlefield of reflection, speculation, and longing. I found myself caught between hope and despair, clinging to the tiniest possibility that there was a reason I could understand, while simultaneously fearing that there was no reason at all. Only a cruel twist of fate that left me stranded in a storm of emotions and unanswered questions. Each attempt to seek clarity, to reconcile her departure with my understanding of our life together, only deepened the ache, forcing me to confront the uncomfortable truth that some people leave not because of something you did or did not do, but because their own path demanded it, leaving you to wrestle with the void they leave behind and the haunting question of why they chose to vanish. As the days passed, I felt the temptation of anger creeping in, a subtle but persistent feeling that began to color my thoughts and actions. At first, it was just a flicker, a flash of frustration that I quickly tried to suppress, convincing myself that perhaps she had her reasons, that maybe life had forced her hand, that maybe the circumstances were beyond anyone's control. But the more I thought about her leaving without a word, the more that flicker grew into a flame, burning hotter with each passing day. The unfairness of it all, the lack of closure, the absence of explanation, it all stirred something dark and potent within me. I imagined confronting her, demanding answers, forcing her to face the consequences of her actions, and each scenario played in my mind with increasing intensity, fueled by the injustice I felt. I pictured the anger boiling over in my voice, sharp words and accusations spilling out, each one a reflection of the frustration and pain I had carried silently. But with the anger came another layer of complexity: guilt. I questioned why I felt such rage, wondering if it was justified, wondering if my own need for answers, my own inability to accept uncertainty, was driving me to a place I did not truly want to go. I balanced on a knife's edge, teetering between resentment and sorrow, and I realized that the human heart is capable of holding contradictory emotions at the same time: love and hate, longing and anger, hope and despair, all swirling together in a storm of inner conflict. I imagined the countless ways I could have acted differently, the conversations I could have had, the things I could have said to prevent this, and yet none of these imagined actions could change the fact that she had left, leaving me to navigate a sea of emotions that seemed impossible to chart. The anger was not just about her departure, but about the loss of control, about the feeling of helplessness, about being left with questions that had no answers. Every time I thought about her, the anger surged again, reminding me that human beings are wired to resist the unknown, to crave explanations, to need closure, and when these needs are denied, the mind seeks other ways to cope, sometimes turning to resentment and thoughts of revenge. I found myself replaying scenarios where she would feel the weight of her decision, imagining her confronting my pain, feeling my absence, recognizing the consequences of leaving without warning. It was a dark mental theater, one where the lines between justice and cruelty blurred, and I had to remind myself constantly that these were just thoughts, not actions, that dwelling too long in anger could consume me entirely. Yet, despite the guilt and self-restraint, the temptation remained, whispering in quiet moments, reminding me of the power of retribution, of the satisfaction that might come from asserting control over a situation that had rendered me powerless. I realized that this temptation was a natural response, an instinctual reaction to betrayal and abandonment, and that I had to confront it honestly if I wanted to survive emotionally. I reflected on human nature, on the tendency to respond to pain with retaliation, to seek balance in the universe when we feel wronged, and I wondered how many people before me had felt the same dark stirrings when left behind, when betrayed. when abandoned without explanation. I also understood that harboring anger and revenge could be a double-edged sword, that it could provide temporary relief, a fleeting sense of power, but ultimately it could consume the soul, trapping me in a cycle of resentment that would prevent healing, prevent closure, and prevent me from moving forward. And yet, in the quiet corners of my mind, I continued to fantasize, to imagine scenarios where the balance was restored, where the pain I felt was acknowledged, where the injustice of her disappearance was made tangible in some way. I wrestled with the duality of my emotions, the pull between righteous indignation and the desire to forgive, between the urge to lash out and the need to protect my own heart from further harm. It was a constant internal battle, an exhausting war fought in silence, and I realized that navigating the temptation of anger and thoughts of revenge was as much a test of character as it was a response to heartbreak. Every day, I practiced restraint. I reminded myself of the cost of succumbing to darkness, of letting the flame of anger dictate my actions, and I sought ways to channel the intensity into something productive, something that would help me endure rather than destroy. And through it all, I understood that the temptation was not something to be ignored, denied, or dismissed, but something to be acknowledged, faced, and ultimately mastered. For only by confronting the anger could I hope to emerge from the aftermath of abandonment stronger and wiser, rather than consumed and hollow amidst the storm of heartbreak, anger, and unanswered questions. I began to notice the first faint glimmers of strength emerging from within me, a resilience I had not realized I possessed until life had forced me to confront loss so profoundly. Initially, it was subtle, a quiet determination to survive, to keep going despite the emptiness that threatened to consume me entirely. Every day became a test of endurance, each moment a challenge to navigate the world while carrying the weight of someone's absence. I found myself forced to confront emotions I had never fully acknowledged before, to sit with the pain rather than running from it, and in doing so, I discovered an inner reservoir of courage and fortitude that had been dormant until that moment. The heartbreak, as unbearable as it was, became a teacher, showing me how deeply I could feel, how much capacity I had for love, and how strong the human spirit can be when it is pushed to the edge. I learned to face mornings without her, to fill the silence of empty rooms with my own presence, to reclaim spaces that had once belonged to both of us as places where I could exist independently. Each small step, from completing a simple task to engaging with the world again, became an exercise in rebuilding, in proving to myself that life continues even when it seems unbearable. The process of finding strength was neither linear nor easy. There were days when despair returned with full force, when memories of her smile or the sound of her voice would crash over me like relentless waves. But even on those days, I noticed the smallest victories, the ability to breathe without collapsing under the weight of emotion, the ability to function at work, the ability to smile at someone new or laugh at a fleeting joke. These moments, though minor in the grand scheme of life, became proof that I could endure, that I could grow, and that I could reclaim agency over my own emotions. I began to see that personal growth often arises from struggle, that pain can catalyze transformation, and that when life strips you bare, it also creates the opportunity to rebuild stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. I focused on nurturing myself, on rediscovering passions and interests that had been neglected, on finding solace in books, music, and quiet reflection. Each act of self-care, each moment dedicated to personal growth, became a declaration of independence, a reminder that I was more than the absence of someone else, that my value was inherent, not tied to the presence or approval of another person. I also began to observe the subtle ways in which emotional pain teaches empathy and understanding, how experiencing loss firsthand can deepen one's ability to connect with the suffering of others, to offer compassion and support to those who face similar heartbreak. The process of personal growth was intertwined with emotional insight, as I realized that while I could not control her actions, I could control how I responded, how I healed, and how I allowed this experience to shape the person I was becoming. I discovered resilience not in grand gestures, but in quiet perseverance, in the willingness to face each day without the comfort of her presence, in the courage to move forward despite uncertainty and lingering grief. Gradually, the emptiness began to shift from a place of despair to a space of reflection and self-discovery, where I could examine my desires, my needs, and my priorities without distraction. I found clarity in solitude, a sense of empowerment in being alone yet whole, a realization that the ability to stand on one's own is a form of strength that no departure can take away. Through this journey, I confronted fears I had not acknowledged before, the fear of being alone, the fear of not being enough, the fear that loss would define me forever, and in confronting them, I diminished their power over me. Each day of endurance became a brick in the foundation of a renewed self, a reminder that survival itself is an act of courage, and that emotional wounds, though painful, can be transformed into lessons, wisdom, and resilience. I learned to let go of the illusion of control, to accept that some questions will remain unanswered, and that true strength lies not in revenge or resentment, but in the ability to rise from the ashes of despair and forge a life that honors both the love I experienced and the independence I reclaimed. The process of growth was gradual, filled with setbacks, relapses into sorrow, and moments of doubt, yet each step forward was proof that I was capable of enduring, capable of healing, and capable of building a future that was not defined by absence, but by the strength, insight, and resilience I had cultivated through it all. Eventually, after the storm of emotions, the heartbreak, the anger, and the struggle to find strength, I came to realize that learning to let go and rebuild life was perhaps the hardest lesson of all, but also the most transformative. Letting go did not mean forgetting her, nor did it mean pretending that the pain had never existed. Instead, it was about accepting the reality of her departure, acknowledging the void she left, and choosing to move forward despite the uncertainty and sorrow that lingered. The first steps were almost imperceptible, a conscious decision to stop obsessing over why she had left, a refusal to let unanswered questions dictate my every thought, a commitment to reclaim moments of peace even when they felt fleeting and fragile. I understood that rebuilding life was not about replacing her or erasing memories, but about weaving those experiences into the fabric of who I had become, allowing the lessons learned, the love felt, and the pain endured to shape a stronger, wiser version of myself. Each day became a deliberate act of reconstruction, from small routines like preparing my own meals or tidying spaces that had once been shared, to larger acts of independence like engaging with friends, pursuing work, or investing in passions that had been neglected. Every step forward was a testament to resilience, a silent declaration that though someone could leave without explanation, life could continue, grow, and even flourish. I learned to embrace solitude as a teacher rather than a punishment, to find comfort in my own company, to hear my own thoughts without the constant echo of her absence. In this solitude, I began reflecting deeply on what I wanted from life moving forward, the values I wished to prioritize, and the person I aspired to become. Slowly, the act of letting go transformed from a painful necessity into a conscious choice, a reclaiming of agency that had been eroded by loss and uncertainty. It involved forgiving not only her but also myself for mistakes, oversights, and the moments when I allowed grief to immobilize me. I understood that forgiveness was not about condoning her actions, but about freeing myself from the mental chains of resentment, allowing my heart to open to new possibilities without being shackled to the past. Rebuilding life required courage, because it meant confronting the discomfort of emptiness, the echo of memories, and the haunting presence of what could no longer be. I had to create new routines, establish new patterns of thought, and cultivate a sense of identity that was independent of her presence. Every small achievement, from completing tasks I had avoided to reaching out to someone new, became a marker of growth, a reminder that I was capable of sustaining myself, of generating happiness and purpose from within. I realized that grief and growth are not opposites, but companions. The pain of loss can fuel insight, self-awareness, and a renewed appreciation for life. I found joy in the mundane, beauty in the ordinary, and a sense of purpose in actions that were entirely my own. The process of rebuilding also involved reassessing relationships, understanding who truly mattered, and distinguishing between those who offered support and those whose presence was superficial. It was a time of emotional discernment, where I learned to prioritize connections that nourished me rather than drained me, and to set boundaries that protected the fragile sense of self I was cultivating. Gradually, the void left by her absence shifted from a place of despair to a space of reflection, opportunity, and even gratitude, because it forced me to confront my own strength, to explore my inner world, and to recognize the resilience I had perhaps underestimated. I learned to celebrate small victories, the first smile without sadness, the first day without tears, the moments when memories of her evoked nostalgia rather than agony. These moments became milestones, evidence that rebuilding life was not just possible, but inevitable, provided I continued to take deliberate, mindful steps forward. I discovered that letting go does not erase love, it transforms it, reshaping it into an appreciation for what was shared without being tethered to the need for reciprocation or closure. By embracing this perspective, I allowed myself to hope again, to dream again, and to invest emotionally in life without fear that loss would define every experience. The journey was neither linear nor easy. It involved setbacks, waves of grief, and moments when the past seemed to pull me backward. Yet, each challenge reinforced the lesson that life is resilient, that the heart can mend, and that the human spirit possesses an innate capacity for renewal. Ultimately, learning to let go and rebuild life became a declaration of freedom, a refusal to be imprisoned by absence, and a commitment to live fully, deeply, and authentically, even when faced with the lingering shadows of someone who once mattered profoundly. I realized that true strength is not measured by the absence of pain, but by the ability to move forward despite it, to transform heartbreak into self-discovery, and to embrace the possibility of a life that honors the past while remaining open to the future.